Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Now, we have seen the Ukrainians attempt to continue the ongoing large-scale offensive operation. We have seen that operation by the Ukrainians so far meet very limited success. As reported by both mainstream media and other sources, the Ukrainian military is meeting incredibly stiff resistance by Russian forces. Now, what weapon systems are the Russians using in a more or less defensive role, which have been at times been used in an offensive role, but these systems work better in a defensive role? So what systems are the Russians using right now that are causing the most casualties to Ukrainian tanks, armored fighting vehicles that are attempting to break through Russian lines? Well, we know the Russians are using artillery, and they're using drone-assisted artillery. But one of the key three weapon systems that are being used right now, and I'm going to talk about those systems, the first one that's not getting a lot of discussion, that is actively being used, and they're being used by small teams of Russian infantry all across the line of contact, and that is the Coronet anti-tank guided weapon system, as seen here. So we know the Russians have started to up production of the Coronet anti-tank guided weapon system. So this system can reach out well beyond 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 meters and effectively engage Ukrainian heavy armor, light armor, any sort of armor, trucks, even bunkers, what have you. Obviously, they're not moving bunkers, so they're being used primarily against armored fighting vehicles, trucks, what have you. This system, obviously, as you can see here, the operator is able to remain in defilade. So essentially, they can place this system just under a terrain feature where only this portion of the weapon system can be seen. And then you have the optic on the other side of the tube here, where the operator can guide the missile from kind of down here in defilade against, the optic is actually here. So again, most likely you would have kind of a hill and only this portion of the weapon system displayed. And then obviously they're also being used in tree lines where there's lots of foliage that has the ability to overlook some of these expansive fields in Ukraine. And they are able to take some of these long-distance shots against these moving armored fighting vehicles. And this is a very, very effective system that is being used. Next, a system that is probably doing quite a bit of damage, if not more damage than the Coronet, is the Lancet. And this system is being continuously upgraded. Now, open source information alleges they're up to the Lancet 3. In all probability, they are probably on Lancet 5, Lancet 6, and they continue to modify these systems. We've also heard that the Russians could be experimenting with acoustic-based sensors. What does that mean? Well, there has been discussion that the Russians are using an AI-based technology where you fire this lancet off, and at times there doesn't even need to be a human in the loop. It has the ability to use an acoustic sensor to identify the sound of a Leopard 2, a Bradley, an armored fighting vehicle, and identify that sound, and then move towards that target via the acoustic sensor, at which time the optical sensor then takes over, scanning and looking for the target. Now, we don't know how many of those are actually being used. What we've seen so far is mostly man-in-the-loop type systems, but we have heard the Russians are indeed experimenting with non-person, non-men-in-the-loop systems, drone systems, such as a modified version of the Lancet, that are attacking Ukrainian targets. So it's interesting. That's going to kind of be the first possibly use of a weapon system without a human in the loop. Now, we'll probably learn more about this as the war continues, but again, by and large, mostly the systems that the Russians are using within the scope of the Lancet is the Lancet 3 with a man-in-the-loop system. So the Russians are able to launch the system 20 miles, 30 miles behind the line of contact, and then they are able to guide this in the direction of where they think a Ukrainian column, Ukrainian units are, and then physically guide this unit into attack said target. And then finally, a weapon system that is causing quite a bit of damage is the Whirlwind anti-tank guided weapon system launched from the KH-52 attack helicopter. And we're going to watch a brief video about this system. So there you have the Whirlwind anti-tank guided weapon system, and again, that is being used primarily on the KH-52 and in tandem with some fairly advanced optronics looking in the thermal spectrum, which are able to identify Ukrainian targets and then hit those Ukrainian targets at range. And I talked about previously the reason why these systems are being more effective now than when the Russians were on the offensive is especially in regards to the KH-50, the K-52. Was I saying KH? Anyway, doesn't matter. The alligator. That system is able to be used in a manner that is well behind the line of contact. The Russians are able to use those K-52s now 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kilometers behind Russian lines. And that protects them from certain Ukrainian air defense systems. Whereas before, they were flying over Ukrainian airspace, and they would then be subjected to Ukrainian air defense systems, such as Stingers and man-portable air defense systems. That's more difficult now that they are being used in this defensive overwatch role. And that's warfare at large now. That is warfare that is changing, and changing very rapidly. We saw the U.S. Marine Corps change its doctrine, remove main battle tanks. And it had discussed that the reason for that was it's becoming a more lighter, mobile, expeditionary type of force. But is that the only reason? Again, technology is changing. We saw the Marine Corps adopt heavily the HIMARS. Again, these long-range, very precisely guided rocket systems that can really reach out at distance and hit targets at extreme distances. And then obviously the Marine Corps uses a wide range of both kamikaze drones now, Switchblade, other systems, to include the Javelin anti-tank guided weapon system as well. So warfare is changing, and drones and technology is changing warfare. And I think right now we are seeing the Russians starting to adapt to that change in warfare. Again, we're seeing the Russians produce a lot more of these Coronets. These Coronets are being found on the battlefield in Ukraine, or being used on the battlefield in Ukraine much more now than they probably were at the start of the campaign. And we know that production levels have increased with the Coronet. And then obviously the Lancet 3. Probably very little was known about this system prior to the war kicking off. And then as the war continued, the Russians have learned through mistakes, trial and error, battlefield issues, that these are very effective systems and they need to be used. And we know now that the Russians are mass producing these things on a massive scale, very large scale right now. And those three systems right now, besides the use of artillery, the Lancet, the Coronet, and the Whirlwind, the Fakir, are causing quite a bit of issue for Ukrainian forces. There's not a lot of changes on the line of contact. Again, as we had talked about the previous day and the previous day before that, we believe at this point the Ukrainian offensive is stalled. Again, they're kind of running into the same issues Russian forces ran into early in the campaign. And then compounding that, the Ukrainians don't have active air support. They don't have these helicopter gunships that they can call upon to attack Russian targets. They don't have Su-25s, they don't have Su-30s, Su-35s, these aircraft that can be used against these targets. And that's why it's going to be very tough for the Ukrainians to succeed in this ongoing offensive. I don't believe there has been a war in the modern era in which an attacking force without air power has succeeded. Man, I get a lot of heat on this channel as being a Russian supporter by simply stating the facts. As if the Ukrainians have some sort of unknown ability to win this conflict without direct air support. And that's where it's going to get. It's where it's going to get interesting as the Western powers, NATO, and Ukraine finally figure out that they're going to need an air force. Then what happens? Are we going to see the introduction of Western aircraft? Are we going to see a no-fly zone, or are we going to see aircraft being handed over to the Ukrainians to being used against the Russians? Again, very difficult to win a war without an air force. And the Ukrainians simply don't have that. The Russians do. So that's kind of where we stand for today. We are continuing to watch the situation very closely. We will have more very, very soon. As always, thank you for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.